Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast.
The biotech funding winter of 2022 to 24 has claimed many casualties. Companies with promising science have shuttered operations, laying off talented teams and abandoning potentially life-saving therapies. Yet some biotechs have not just survived, they've actually thrived, advancing multiple programs through clinical development, while others have struggled to keep the lights on. What separates the companies that make it from those that don't? Is it just about having deep-pocketed investors, or is there something more? Today we're speaking with Baruch Harris, Chief Operating Officer at Pretzel Therapeutics, a biotech company that is defying the odds. Baruch brings over 2 decades of business leadership experience across consulting, big pharma and early-stage biotech. With a PhD in biochemistry and extensive experience in business development, investor relations and corporate strategy, he's been instrumental in guiding Pretzel from seed stage through a $72.5 million Series A and subsequent Series B financing. Pretzel Therapeutics is pioneering first-in-class therapies targeting mitochondrial biology, with their lead program in phase 1 for rare mitochondrial depletion syndrome and a program advancing in obesity. In today's episode, Baruch shares the strategic decisions and creative financing approaches that have kept Pretzel advancing. We'll explore how to build investor relationships that weather market turndowns, why spinning out assets can create more value than keeping everything under one roof, and the unconventional deal structures biotechs are using to extend runway when traditional venture funding evaporates. Baruch, thanks for joining me. Tell me about yourself. How does that mix of backgrounds help you run the business side of Pretzel?
Thank you. And first of all, let me say, Dora, thank you and thanks to Life Science Networks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's great to talk to you today. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, tell the audience. I got interested in the business side of life sciences. I did my PhD at UC San Francisco, which is a fantastic institution for scientific training. Did a hardcore structural molecular biology for many years, published papers, did a lot of pipetting, all the rest of it. But I came to understand that being a lab scientist was not a good fit for me. I always had an interest in the business side and the people side of things. And I was out in the Bay Area. In San Francisco, of course, biotech, tech, entrepreneurship in general is all around you if you live out there. And I got involved with entrepreneurial activities in life science and biotech first within the university, where there was a growing entrepreneur group and organization. I did an internship at a venture capital firm, a life science focused VC firm, a Burrell and Company run by Steve Burrell. I was the only PhD intern in the fund at that time that they had ever had. And they were quite skeptical that a PhD would ever add any value. There's a whole other story about Burrell and Company that we probably don't have time for today, but just to sort of leave that there. I read this great book, by the way. It's a little dated now, but for anyone who's kind of considering a career change, I'd recommend it. It's called Leaving the Ivory Tower by Cynthia Robbins Roth, who's a biotech reporter, and she interviewed about 24 different folks who started out as PhDs in the life sciences and ended up in very interesting but very different careers. So just a little shout out for that because it kind of helped me on my way.
I actually started many, many moons ago as well in molecular biology.
Yeah, excellent.
Before we get into the business side of Pretzel, tell me about its science. What are you actually developing?
Sure. So Pretzel, we think of ourselves as an energetics company, right? So we're a drug development company. We're trying to create new medicines for patients. We're developing life-changing medicines with a very broad pipeline of all first-in-class treatments addressing novel targets in the mitochondria. So the company was founded on a mitochondrial biology discovery platform, which has been generating novel but very well biologically validated targets in the mitochondrial space. But because the mitochondria are so key to so many things, they can involve themselves in many biological processes, and we can touch many different disease areas, disease conditions. So all of our stuff is completely novel. All our programs are first in class against novel targets with robust validation on the biology. Our lead program, PX578, is just wrapping up phase 1 this year. It's in our bioenergetics restoration franchise. That's a first in class approach to targeting mitochondrial DNA polymerase, which is also called POL gamma, and targeting mitochondrial DNA depletion syndromes, which are a set of rare genetic diseases where people are unable to maintain their own mitochondrial DNA. That's in the phase 1 clinical development, as I said. We also have some earlier stage programs with similar types of mechanisms. And then, we also see applicability with a neurodegenerative disease because many neurodegenerative diseases are known to have abnormally low mitochondrial DNA levels. And then, there's potential downstream applications and things such as sarcopenia, which are longer term. We also, as you mentioned, have an earlier stage program in obesity that's against a different target. It's an example of what I think we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes, where we followed the science, but we've ended up in very different therapeutic areas. So we have opportunities downstream in severe rare diseases with high unmet need, no disease-modifying treatments, and potential upside in several more common conditions, like the conditions of aging.
And you joined Pretzel right before their Series A back in 2021, so 5 years ago now, which is a bit crazy. Yeah. Looking at the last few years, though, what separated the biotech companies that have survived the past few difficult years from the ones that didn't? Is it just about having deep-pocketed investors, or is there more to it?
Yeah, excellent question, right? And what a 5 or 6 years it has been, right? If we think back to 2019, 2020, and up until today, in my personal opinion, a lot of companies got started and got more capital during the great biotech bull market than probably would have under quote unquote normal circumstances. So it's a bit like a wild party that went on for years, and we've woken up to a screaming hangover and the house is a mess and we don't know who's sleeping on the couch. And, basically that's the current bear market. And we are still living through, I think, the painful process of recovery, valuation reset, consolidation, acquisitions, dismantling, licensing of assets, et cetera. So, when the amount of available investment capital decreases, and this is true not just for biotechs, but also for investors, the amount of available investment capital has been decreasing. Even good companies can run out of cash and fail. And the biotech graveyard is full of companies that had good science and might have made it if they'd only had a little bit more runway. So it's really critical to have a good syndicate, as you mentioned, with investors who have the capital, see the potential, and can continue to support their portfolio companies. We have a great syndicate of investors, you can see it on our website, who have been extremely supportive as they've seen the science continue to advance, understand the value creation thesis, and will continue to get behind it. We also made strategic portfolio decisions along the way about what we should spend money on. You can't fund everything indefinitely. So you really have to look hard at your portfolio of programs and the amount of available capital that you have or that you can raise, and ask yourself hard questions about what to support and what to put on the shelf. Not everyone's always going to be happy about that. Sometimes you have to stop funding high quality science so that you can support the programs that are the most promising in your portfolio, and importantly, the ones that investors will continue to fund. So the portfolio risk, the capital management strategies that we employed, including keeping fixed costs low, have really helped to make the money last, and that's a big part of it. I think commonly, but especially in a bear market like this one, biotech company valuations are often judged by the company's lead asset. So where is it in clinical development? What's the total addressable market? And everything else in the pipeline is a little bit more on the margin. So people say a bull market is dominated by greed and a bear market is dominated by fear. And in a bear market, investors are more conservative. People want product stories. People want less risk, and all, of course, at an attractive valuation, right? So at the end of the day, we have to remember society pays us to create new medicines for the patients that really need them. So the more your lead program looks like a medicine, the better it is for continuing to get that capital you need.
I always like to hear the different types of metaphors people use to describe that. As you said, it was the biotech landscape was a wild party where maybe too many people were getting investment. I've heard like that was a time where money did actually grow on trees. Obviously now it's more of the biotech graveyard that you mentioned. But as you mentioned, obviously as well, Pretzel does have very strong financial backers. But what about biotechs that don't? What are some sort of creative ways companies can raise money when traditional venture funding dries up?
Yeah, so good question, right? As we discussed, earlier, the focus has to be on lead assets, on clinical applications and markets, reducing risk as much as you can. I mean, clear clinical and regulatory path, evidence that you can address a serious unmet medical need or the ability to solve a problem with an existing drug. So the company itself has to get its own house in order in that way, right? So you have to make yourself as attractive as possible. But there are other creative ways to raise money other than a straight equity financing round. Examples include strategic acquisitions, which I think we're going to talk about in a bit. Licensing deals, of course, is an old classic, licensing deals with larger companies. Spinouts, so some of your assets can make more sense in somebody else's portfolio. all these things will bring in cash and get further down the track to the next value creating milestone before doing another equity round. And a lot of times that is the right thing to do. As an example, with Pretzel, the Rome merger that we recently executed on was a creative way to add capital to our balance sheet to help advance our lead asset while also acquiring some interesting early stage science.
So with spinouts, you mentioned obviously your lead candidate is the most attractive thing. So a spinout may be useful when you have a couple of lead candidates to sort of separate that and really sort of shine the spotlight on each one.
Yeah, with larger companies, a lot of times in business and economics, they talk about a conglomerate discount where you have a single company, which is a bunch of different businesses stuck together, and markets struggle to value those. So they assign the value to the lowest multiple business, basically. So I think the biotech version of that is 90% of your valuation is assigned on your lead asset, and the others are sort of not ignored, but maybe marginalized. So this is especially true if your pipeline has programs for different therapeutic areas, right? So it's a challenge not only from a value perspective, but also it can muddy the story and confuse people. So for example, if you break a company with a pipeline of very diverse therapeutic applications into separate businesses, you have the potential to unlock more value separately versus the combined company. So a lot of times it makes a lot of sense to do that. Early on, where everything is in the laboratory, you want to follow the science and the work is relatively inexpensive. So that allows you to work on different things. We worked on many different things. But then as the pipeline matures and we follow the science into different therapeutic areas, you need to decide what's the best corporate structure to maximize value overall. And often the answer to that is some of your assets would find a better home somewhere else.
Pretzel has multiple candidates, right? You've kept your investor backing through this really tough funding environment. What's the key to maintaining that support? How do you keep them confident when so many other companies are struggling?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, you have to continue to show scientific progress, consistent forward momentum towards realizing the potential that they first saw when they first invested. So I think it's important to remember that they invested initially for a reason. They had a thesis about value creation in your company. So you have to show that thesis, the reasons that they originally invested, that's bearing fruit and things are working out the way that they hoped. So a lot of it's about communication, but it's even more about just continuing to show data, scientific progress, things moving forward, disciplined execution. For Pretzel, we continue to demonstrate that we're moving forward. And with our lead asset now in the clinic, phase 1 data generated, our platform continues to generate novel first-in-class drugs based on mitochondrial biology with transformative potential for patients, and demonstrating to investors that we're realizing our potential and growing in value while managing our portfolio and our finances prudently, doing what we said we were going to do, executing, that's important. So, in biotech, the biggest challenges are to early stage development anyway. It's scientific uncertainty, access to capital, and limited staff to execute on operational activities. So we try to overcome those challenges by creating an environment internally that embraces agility, lots and lots of communication, and focused on the most important milestones.
Yeah, interesting. Let's move on. Tell us about the acquisition you did recently. How did you find that opportunity and what made it attractive compared to other financing options?
Yeah, great question. So we recently, this came out earlier in January. We recently acquired a company called Rome Therapeutics, which is another private company. Like many successful unions, Pretzel and Rome were introduced by friends. We had two investors in common. And in 2025, Rome's board decided it was time for them to seek strategic options. This was confirmed publicly by Rome in September 2025, and went through a process, ultimately deciding that Pretzel was the best option. They had capital on their balance sheet and they had an interesting early stage program, but no clear path forward for the long term for them. So our CEO, Jay Parrish, had been on Rome's board, and I had also consulted for them before joining Pretzel. I was part of the founding team. So we knew enough about the company. We knew the company and the opportunity to be able to manage it. And the advantages for us, as we said, we were able to put extra capital on our balance sheet, very important. It's a little bit like an equity financing without having to do a VC round since we use stock in the transaction. We also acquired some really interesting early stage science, and we will follow up on that and see where it takes us. Our crack team of drug hunters is going to follow the science, see where that goes, and who knows, that may end up becoming a very interesting portfolio program as well.
Oh, really interesting. Let's switch gears again. Let's talk about your lead drug. It treats rare mitochondrial disease, obviously, but your second program is in obesity. This is obviously a huge market dominated by giants like Novo and Lilly. What's the best way to approach developing this asset in such a competitive environment?
The obesity market has come a long way. So I've been in this business for 25 years and alive for longer than that, unfortunately. But in no small part, this market has come so far because of the hard work and risk taking of companies like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, who I think have a well-deserved leadership position here. They were working on this for a long time when nobody else thought it was worth it. People struggling with obesity and related conditions now, for the first time, have safe and effective pharmaceuticals to help them. And I know personally that it's made a huge positive difference in many people's lives. So let me say that first. Having said that, and as good as the current incretin-based therapies are, right, your GLPs and your double Gs and triple Gs, there are some significant unmet needs. Incretins don't work for everybody. Even in a well-controlled clinical trial setting, you can actually look at the published data from phase 3 trials and see the slice of patients that don't lose any weight or even gain weight. And many people can't tolerate incretins well. There's lots of discontinuation. Many people can't use the highest, most effective dose. I saw a statistic that something like 85% of patients discontinue within 2 years. The patients would like something as effective but more tolerable, maybe something that can be used together with incretins in a clinical setting to get better outcomes. Patients would like oral dosing. And as we all know, muscle loss is a big problem, so anything that could help with that. So a long way of saying there are still lots of opportunities to differentiate in the obesity space. Not saying that it's going to be easy, but focusing on those areas is probably the winning strategy. I should mention, though, before we finish with this one, that Lilly and Novo are well aware of these dynamics, and kudos to them. They continue to innovate actively, not only in their own R&D, but doing a lot of deals with smaller companies and supporting continued innovation in the space. So I think if we continue to watch the obesity space, we're going to see better and better things happening over the next 5-10 years.
Let's get back to sort of financing structures for just a moment. We've talked about acquisitions, we've talked about spinouts a little bit. Beyond those, what other creative financing structures are you seeing work in today's environment?
Sure. So, one approach that can work well is to spin out non-core assets into a new company. So this is especially appropriate if your program is very promising, but maybe it's too early for a strategic to want to buy it, to want to take it on or license it. So it might be attractive to investors who could fund it to the point where a strategic would then want to take it and get their exit that way. At a certain stage, when you're developing assets in diverse therapeutic indications, there's not much economy of scale, because outside G&A, you need different expertise, right? Clinical, regulatory, other things. It's very hard to find, for example, a chief medical officer who is really excellent at developing drugs for rare disease and also for mass market hypertension, for example. So for this reason, I think we try to take a very sound strategic approach to developing assets in multiple different areas. And speaking generically, spinouts can often offer the advantage of a different investor base and their own valuation, with potential to realize more value in separate companies. Investors, like all of us, have their own preferences. Take any therapeutic area. Obesity is a fine example. Some investors are interested in making new investments in obesity right now, and some really are not. So having focused individual entities where investors can make their bets can be very helpful for getting investment capital. And for the parent company, you can continue to realize benefit by retaining equity as part of the spin-out. A lot of folks do that. Participating in license economics like upfronts, milestones. And it also becomes anti-dilutive for the investors in the parent company. So there's money that they don't have to invest to continue to see development of the lead program. Now, in talking about other things beyond spinouts, so we talked about equity financing, we talked about acquisition for cash on the balance sheet, we talked about spinouts. Out licensing obviously remains a classic key strategy for creating and realizing value in the biotech space, especially in therapeutic areas that require large clinical studies or marketing muscle or non-core geographies. Non-dilutive funding and non-dilutive financing, things like grants, government grants such as DARPA or BARDA, SBIR, NIH, despite the current turmoil, those are still very attractive sources of funding if you can get them. In many cases, biotechs can obtain millions or even tens of millions in funding, for example, to do a clinical trial. And then outside of government, there are a number of private foundations, often they're disease focused. So private foundations are willing to fund research, they're willing to fund clinical trials. I think that we've seen some great stuff come out of cystic fibrosis and Michael J. Fox and Parkinson's UK. We have a grant from Parkinson's UK. So there are a lot of organizations which really want to see new medicines for patients and are willing to put money behind that. And then there are other things like SPACs, which have made a bit of a niche comeback in the biotech space, fraught with issues, but can sometimes work.
Let's talk about manufacturing strategy for just a second, because this is the PharmaSource podcast and we just love talking about manufacturing. At Pretzel Therapeutics, I know your science, we talked last time, your science teams usually pick the manufacturing partners, but you obviously sort of get involved sometimes. You can sort of veto on business terms. What are the red flags that make you step in, and kind of what's a cause for concern when looking at manufacturing partners?
Yeah, I mean, if I could, perhaps I'll maybe back up a little bit and tell the audience a little bit about our model and how we work as a company, because vendor relationships, including manufacturers, are extremely important to us. So we're an early clinical organization, right? Our lead program's in phase 1. We do not have a drug on the market, so we're not dealing with commercial supply. Although since we're in the clinic, we're dealing with clinical supply. But more broadly, we've always, from the very beginning, employed an outsourced or hybrid model across the spectrum of functions. We only have 35 full-time employees, right, including a dedicated research group based in Sweden. This is great for us strategically because it allows us to be very nimble and pivot and change direction quickly. So this research organization in Sweden, it's an outstanding small group of scientists. They focus on core capabilities like basic science, high throughput screening. It's like our mitochondrial biology center of excellence. But other than that, we rely on a great network of external partners, vendors, consultants for capabilities ranging from synthetic chemistry, CMC, scale-up, process development, clinical supply, preclinical studies, all sorts of things, anything you could imagine. And this allows us as a biotech company allocating capital to be cash efficient, pivot quickly, follow the science, and change according to market conditions. I will say that over the span of my career, the number of high quality vendors and consultants for biotech companies to work with has increased dramatically. So we've developed into an industry. I think we've developed a lot more sophistication as an industry, and we can conduct most activities through a network of quality partnerships rather than building it all inside in a brick and mortar facility, which is a great thing for the industry. In terms of what we look for and red flags, as you said, we really try to select vendors that are aligned on quality, on accountability, security, so intellectual property protection, data protection, confidentiality, intellectual property. We have to own the IP at the end of the day. That's all a biotech company has is its intellectual property. Customer service is really important in terms of if there's an issue, issues do come up, but we need to feel confident that it will be addressed quickly and with full transparency. I'll give you an example. We were in the final stages of selecting a vendor for an animal study, and it became known to us through another source that they were dealing with a significant regulatory issue, which was potentially serious enough to shut down the site. And they hadn't seen fit to notify us, even though we were in final contracting with them. So we didn't sign that contract and we don't work with them anymore, right? Again, things happen, issues come up, but transparency, communication, trust, those things are really important to us. We really want it. That's what we need to feel that we're really in a partnership, as opposed to just a one-off transactional relationship. Of course, we look for vendors that can contribute extensive knowledge and skills, maybe that we don't have in-house, regulatory, IP, quality. Pricing, not as much of an issue as you might think, because time and quality are the dominating factors to success. And if you get it done right in a timely fashion the first time, that's really worth a lot. So just to be clear, I don't mean you can charge whatever you want. Money is no object. We don't just go around throwing money at everybody. But if a vendor can deliver reliably, with high quality, keep us on timeline, get it right the first time, that's really valuable to us. That's worth real money. So, and time really is money. We're always keeping an eye on the burn and the cash out date. So, and as we talked about at the top of the podcast, sometimes just having a few more months can make all the difference in the world. I guess just on business model, I'm not sure how much questions have come in about this, but we typically do fee for service versus some sort of a risk sharing arrangement. I'm open to risk sharing models, and those have been proposed, but in practice have not been able to make those work. I think if you want to do risk sharing, you really have to be willing to shoulder the downside risk as well as the upside.
I hear the risk sharing model being thrown around in the industry, but it seems to sort of be a whisper and a sort of idea rather than something that kind of people are actually feel comfortable trialing.
Yeah, I've discussed it with several vendors, over my career. In theory, there's nothing wrong with it. I think just in practice, it's kind of I think it's just tough to make the numbers work. But in theory, we're completely open to it with the right vendor.
As you were saying, cost is obviously important, but there are other things that have a bigger value, and that sort of we're moving away from really cost-driven partnerships to just value-driven partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, again, not to say the cost is unimportant, but at this stage, getting that data, getting it soon, and knowing that it's being done with high quality is really worth a lot of money to a biotech company where the clock is always ticking.
And feeling like your molecule is being cared about and is a priority.
For sure.
Your lead program finishes phase 1 this spring. You have other earlier programs too. How do you decide where to spend the money? Sorry, moving on a little bit from manufacturing, but with multiple sort of leads in your portfolio, how do you decide what to speed up and what to slow down?
That is the key question that biotech leaders must struggle with. And there's so many factors involved. It's hard to give a generic answer. So you have to look at the return on investment, the target customer audience, who will pay for this, what stage of development is it, what's the indication, what's the market, the validating data. A critical exercise is to go program by program if you have a portfolio and ask, what will it take to get to the next value creation point, right? How much money will it cost me and how much time will it take to get data that will drive the value of this program up 5x, 10x? And will that take us to the point where we can partner it? Will it take us to the point where somebody's willing to invest? What will you investors or partners actually pay for? So those are hard questions, and not everybody on your team is going to necessarily like the answers that come out of that exercise, but it's a really important exercise to do.
What's your one piece of advice for other biotech leaders?
Only one piece?
Yeah, we don't have all day. Okay, I'll give you a couple.
Okay, all right. So I guess, all right, so I have to distill it down. So time is money, money is time. Focus capital. You have to focus your capital. At the end of the day, as the biotech leaders, we're allocating capital. Focus your capital on things that give you the most bang for your buck so you can buy more time for yourself. As we said before, a lot of biotech companies die because they run out of runway. And they might have been successful if they had another 6 or 12 months to work on a program. And we're in a funding winter right now. As we said, winter is here. Hopefully the spring thaw will come soon, but no one should rely on the type of bull market where everybody gets funded no matter what. I'm no better at predicting the future than anyone else, but I feel like things are really, maybe starting to thaw out a little bit. M&A continues to be robust. Fundamentals are strong. IPOs are starting to happen. Science has never been better, at least not since I've been paying attention. And there's a massive need that remains for new medicines that can alleviate human suffering. So, also in terms of capital efficiency, unlike the early days of biotech, today, a couple of postdocs with a couple $100,000 in convertible debt seed financing can rent a bench at Lab Central and generate critical data to get to the next critical inflection point. So you can do it cheaper, you can do it more efficiently, you can do it with less redundancy, and the industry has come a long way and matured quite a bit. So in some ways, even though it's a hard business, but I do think there's never been a better time to be in this business.
Well, quite an optimistic note to end on, and quite topical actually, as it's February at this time of recording. So yeah, let's hope that spring really is around the corner. Thanks a lot for your time today. It's been a great chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it, and look forward to talking